My name is Katie Hinman, and I am the director of the Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion here at the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And it's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of AAAS and DOSER to the 2023 December Dialogues. Each year, our December Dialogues is an opportunity to engage in conversation around a subject at the intersection of science, religion, and society. And we're delighted you're joining us for tonight's discussion. Just rest, how rest can transform ourselves and our society. We're thrilled to be able to welcome those of you who are here in person, as well as those of you who are joining us online. And as we begin, I want to acknowledge the land on which we gather. Land acknowledgements are important to help undo Indigenous erasure and to tell a more complete truth about our history. Here in Washington, D.C., we're in the unceded lands of the Piscataway, Pamunkey, and Nacotchtank or Anacostan peoples, the traditional stewards of this land. While there are no longer any Nacotchtank Anacostans, there are still Piscataway and Pamunkey in the area, and other Native peoples. And we acknowledge that their ancestors were forced out by colonization, genocide, disease, and war. We pay our respects to elders past and present. And we also acknowledge the extraction of life and labor from millions of people of African descent for more than 400 years, particularly as we are so near the White House and the Capitol, both of which were built by enslaved laborers. And since we're here at a science institution, we encourage you to think about the ways that science has harmed and continues to harm Indigenous peoples and those of African descent, and the power that you have to stop and repair that harm. This acknowledgement is a small step toward creating collaborative and respectful relationships with Indigenous peoples and nations. And you can visit native-land.ca to learn more about Indigenous lands across North America and those Indigenous peoples that called your area home. We encourage you to consider building relationships with your local Indigenous communities and actively supporting them, whether with time, money, or land. And as we acknowledge this history and this present, we are called upon to work toward justice, equity, and liberation for all. A few logistical notes before we begin our program. For those of you here in person, there are some DOSER staff members around if you need assistance. If you are DOSER staff, if you would raise your hand, they may still be outside. We've got Lila in the back and Curtis is outside. Restrooms are located in the lobby out past the elevators and to the left. We are providing ASL interpretation, both live and on Zoom. And for those of you on Zoom, you should be able to activate captions by selecting the CC or live transcript option at the bottom of your screen. If you're joining us online, you can find a link to the event program in the chat. After opening remarks from our panelists, we'll move into a moderated discussion and we will have time for Q&A from the audience. And in order to allow full participation for people both in person and online, we are using the Menti program to collect questions for the Q&A portion of the program. So you can scan the QR code on your screen or in your program, or go to menti.com and enter the code 79510841. You can enter questions throughout the presentation. You can also upvote others' questions. If you have questions and do not have a smartphone, please feel free to find a DOSER person to enter those questions into Menti. Because we are asking you to use your phones during this, I will take that moment to remind you to turn off the ringer on your phone before we begin the program. And also a reminder that this event is being recorded. So again, I want to welcome you all on behalf of AAAS. The American Association for the Advancement of Science is the world's largest general scientific society and the publisher of the Science family of journals. Membership of AAAS represents scientists from all fields and disciplines, and our mission is to advance science and innovation throughout the world for the benefit of all. In 1995, AAAS established the Dialogue on Science and Ethics and Religion, or DOSER program, to foster dialogue between scientific and religious communities on issues of science, technology, and society, recognizing that these communities often overlap. And the DOZER program does this in a variety of ways, with events and engagement with faith communities, seminaries, and houses of worship, hosting workshops for scientists, providing public events such as this one, and creating resources. Our focus is on bringing people together, creating space for dialogue and discussion, identifying shared values, recognizing that we won't always come to agreement, but hopefully can increase trust, provide room for co-creation, and achieve understanding and respect. I do want to highlight just a few of the activities that DOZER is currently involved in. Our Engaging Scientists and Faith Communities initiatives support scientists, educators, and science communicators in thoughtful, inclusive science and communication and engagement activities. They include things like hosting workshops at scientific societies and for science communicators on inclusive engagement with people of faith, working with informal science learning institutions like museums and aquaria to explore opportunities for intentionally engaging with faith communities, and profiling scientists who are doing this work in different contexts to give examples of what engagement with faith communities looks like. And our science and theological education initiatives work to prepare future religious leaders to engage with their congregations and communities about topics and issues in science, building networks between seminary faculty and scientists, and supporting opportunities for science discourse in theological education. We do that through providing grants for seminaries and other theological education institutions to incorporate science engagement into their curricula. We currently have a grant program specifically for focusing on climate science in theological education, and we have just selected our first cohort of grants for that, and we'll have a new round of applications opening soon. We also develop resources to foster conversation. I encourage you to check out our video resources. We have several different series, including Science, the Wide Angle, Who is Science, and a wonderful series on humans and race, including our short film, Science as Mastery. And we work with continuing education providers to bring programs that help faith leaders bring science engagement into their ministry contexts. If you are going to be attending the AAAS annual meeting in February in Denver, I invite you to join us for some of our programs. We have a wonderful session on making science accessible by design, talking about accessibility in science. One on thinking outside of the box, science engagement and literacy in faith communities, and a workshop on science engagement with people of faith. And we encourage you to stay connected with the DOZER program through our websites, email, Twitter or X, Facebook, and other social media. Those links are also in your program. And I will remind you that DOZER is supported by grants, but also by donations. So if you would wish to support the programs of the DOZER program, you can make a donation on our website. So I am thrilled to introduce the topic for tonight's program, Just Rest. As days get shorter and nights get longer, this is the time of year when we think about getting cozy, snuggling up, hibernating. But realistically, we know that many of us are not great at resting. Our society encourages a culture of activity and movement and accomplishment. The so-called Protestant work ethic is seen as a foundational principle of American society, embodied by the statement of John Smith, the leader of Jamestown, who said, "He that will not work shall not eat," as well as modern ideas of hustle culture and you snooze, you lose. Productivity is viewed as our measure of success, and things like rest, Sabbath, and relaxation are seen as luxuries or very unfortunate necessities that interfere with our ability to get things done. But rest is vital for our health and well-being. Sleep deprivation can cause impaired decision-making, altered perception, and memory deficits after as little as 24 hours or even less. Rest is also important to our spiritual and mental health. So much so that many, if not most, religious faiths build times for rest and reflection into their traditions and rituals. And rest is also a justice issue. Martin Luther King Jr. connected the ideal of the Protestant work ethic to the exploitation of enslaved people and the poor. So in tonight's event, we're going to explore these aspects of rest and discuss with our panelists how rest is connected to physical and public health, religious practice and spiritual health, and social justice. I'm delighted to introduce our speakers for this evening. Before our discussion, we've asked our three panelists to share some opening words about themselves, their backgrounds, and their work that speaks to our theme of rest. And then we'll have time of moderated discussion with Rachel Klein, and then time for Q&A from the audience. Our first panelist is Dr. Dana Johnson, sleep epidemiologist and assistant professor in the Department of Epidemiology at the Rollins School of Public Health at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Johnson received her bachelor's degree from Purdue University and master's degrees in epidemiologic science, public health, and social work, as well as her PhD from the University of Michigan. And her research focuses on understanding root causes of sleep health disparities and their impacts on health by addressing social and environmental determinants of sleep disorders and insufficient sleep, and investigating the influence of factors such as sleep disorders and disturbances on disparities in health outcomes. She also engages in community partnerships to investigate the effect of environmental exposures and housing on health. Second, we'll hear from Judith Shulevitz. She's a critic and contributing writer to The Atlantic and was the founding culture editor of Slate and founding editor of Lingua Franca. She's been a columnist at the New York Times, Book Review, the New Republic, and New York Magazine. And she's the author of The Sabbath World, Glimpses of a Different Order of Time, a project that grew out of her own interest and curiosity about the concept and practices of Sabbath, and explores the Jewish and Christian day of rest in history and in current practice. And she's currently working on a book for the Yale Jewish Lives series. And our third panelist is Dom Chatterjee, a community organizer and communications professional and yoga teacher. They're the founder of Rest for Resistance and co-founder of QTPOC Meditation. Rest for Resistance strives to uplift marginalized communities who rarely get access to adequate health care or social support, centering the experiences of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. They work to create healing spaces and resources by and for queer and trans people of color, and Dom is a student at Union Theological Seminary. And our conversation will be moderated this evening by Rachel Klein, Program Associate for the Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion here at AAAS. Rachel has a bachelor's degree in brain and cognitive sciences from MIT and a master's in pharmacology from Boston University. She joined AAAS in 2017 as assistant editor for the journal Science Robotics and has been part of the DOSER program since 2019. One last reminder that throughout the program, you can submit questions through Menti as well as upvoting other questions. And now it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Dana Johnson.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome. I'm really happy to be here and share a little bit about the importance of sleep. And so I'm titling my remarks, Healthy Sleep, the Secret to Wellness. So it's important for us to think about how sleep is...
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. It's important for us to think about how sleep is vital to our survival. And so I really like this definition that was published in an article that talks about sleep as this non-negotiable state, a biological state that's required for the maintenance of human life. And our need for sleep parallels those for air, food, and water. And so when we think about these three pillars for wellness, sleep should be one of those alongside of diet and physical activity. And so, as mentioned in the opening remarks, sleep is an important determinant of health and health outcomes. And so when we sleep, there are important physiologic activities that occur. So our sleep is vital for our memory and learning. So when we sleep, this is the time that our memories get consolidated. It's also really important for our emotional regulation. I'm sure we can all think about a time that we were sleep deprived and maybe we were a little bit more moody or irritable the next day is directly related to the lack of sleep that we received the night before. It's also really important for our immune and inflammatory function. We have epidemiologic data that supports that people who sleep longer, they have a lower risk of catching a cold. And so we know that when we sleep, we have these boosts to our immune system that help us fight off different diseases. And it's also really important for our metabolism. When we sleep, there are important hormones that are regulated, those that are controlled, that are related to our ability to feel hungry, also to feel full. And so also when we're up longer, we also have more of an opportunity to consume calories. And so it's related, or lack of sleep is related to obesity. And then also it's important for cardiovascular regulation. So when we sleep, this is the time that there's healing and repairing to our blood vessels. And then in terms of our performance, no matter what we do, sleep is vital to that. It helps give us energy, enables us to be able to perform in our daily lives. And so this is just a figure that I found that really highlights all of these areas that I spoke of in regards to sleep as this important determinant, really helping to manage our energy and help us with focus and concentration throughout our days. And so when we think about sleep health as a concept, it's a multi-dimensional construct that can be adapted to social and environmental demands. And there's different dimensions of sleep. And so oftentimes we think about just sleep duration, but there are several other dimensions. So sleep regularity, so how consistent our sleep is across a week, is highly related to improved health and better health outcomes. And then our individual satisfaction with sleep is important. And then also how alert we are during the day. So oftentimes when we think about sleep, we're just thinking about what happens during the sleep period, but it's also important to consider our function during the day as a reflection of our sleep. And then the timing of sleep. There's data that shows that people that have an earlier sleep timing, they have better health outcomes. And then our sleep efficiency, so how much of the night that we're actually sleeping. This is an important dimension of overall sleep health. And then lastly, sleep duration, which is exactly what it sounds like. This is the amount of sleep that you receive at any given time. And so we can measure this, and the acronym RU-SATED is what's used to help us remember these different dimensions and how they collectively contribute to overall healthy sleep. And so as an epidemiologist, I'm very interested in how common or the prevalence of different sleep disorders in the community. And from the public health perspective, it's important to note that sleep disorders are highly prevalent, yet they are largely undiagnosed. So some of these really common sleep disorders, such as insomnia or sleep apnea, for example, are often go undertreated, and there are severe consequences for that occur throughout, whether it manifests as being sleepy during the day, making more mistakes, all the way to affecting and having an increased risk of cognitive decline and other health outcomes. So this figure is just here to show the prevalence of these different conditions and how they contribute to the development and also the prevalence of several adverse health outcomes, including mortality. And so there are a number of consequences for poor sleep, and I'm just highlighting a few to really drive this point home. And so these are just a few statistics across different articles. So 20% of serious motor vehicle crash injuries are attributable to sleep disorders and sleep deprivation. 21% of fatal crash injuries are attributable to drowsy driving. So drowsy driving is as detrimental as drunk driving. And then approximately 15% of Alzheimer's disease may be prevented by interventions to reduce sleep problems and disorders. So this is showing sleep as a potential target to reduce these adverse consequences from accidents to health outcomes. And then, as mentioned again during the introduction, sleep is not equitable. There are sleep disparities that exist in society, particularly in the United States. We see that historically minoritized individuals are more likely to have sleep difficulties and sleep disorders. We also see that sleep disorders occur at an earlier age of onset in these communities, which means a longer duration of disease. And some of the reasons or determinants for poor sleep in these communities include reduced access to care, mistrust and transportation issues, racism. So structural racism is one of the fundamental contributors to sleep inequities. Also experiencing psychosocial stress. And so there's a unique stress that is additive to the stressors experienced by all people that are encountered or faced within marginalized populations. And then there's other health conditions that can contribute. And then also our neighborhood environments. So we know historically minoritized individuals are more likely to live in disadvantaged populations or in neighborhoods that have different features that really serve as barriers to healthy sleep. So more air pollution, more traffic, more social destinations, as well as inopportune light exposure, which alters circadian rhythms and the sleep-wake cycle. And so lastly, I want to end with just a few tips, which we refer to as sleep hygiene, but really are healthy sleep practices. So it's important to go to bed and wake up at the same time every day, even on weekends for those of us that work. So having that regular sleep schedule. Make sure that the bedroom is dark and quiet and cool. And I also want to highlight that there is a level of privilege that comes with being able to sleep in a dark, quiet room. And so it is really up to us epidemiologists as well as clinicians to really find ways and advocates at a policy level to design homes and neighborhoods that can really be conducive to allow folks to sleep in a dark room. Also, it's important to remove electronic devices and avoid large meals, alcohol, and caffeine before bed, exercise during the day, and as best we can, reduce stress and anxiety. So thank you very much for listening to those introductory remarks, and I look forward to engaging more during the Q&A session. Thank you.
So thanks for having me. Thanks to Dozer. Thanks to Rachel for calling, and Katie, and for what you do. This is not something that will be immediately obvious to you, but the Sabbath is actually right at the intersection of science, technology, and social issues. It's not just sort of off there in the religious space. But, and I'm going to tell you a little cautionary tale that I think illustrates this pretty well. And it involves everybody's favorite dictator, Joseph Stalin. So Stalin, set your mind back to 1929. We're in the beginning of the first 5-year plan. This is this plan to accelerate production so that the Soviet Union could catch up with the Western industrialized societies. And you know, they've set up all these factories, they have all these new machines, but Stalin and the Communist Party don't feel that the production has increased enough. And what they realize is that there's 1 day a week, in some places 2 days a week, where the machines are just sitting idle. And that just seems silly, it's a waste. So what do? They decide to lop the weekend off the week. They simply get rid of Saturday and Sunday. They have a 5-day week. And the reason they do that, of course, is because they don't want anyone resting, because they don't want everyone resting. They want some group of people working every single day, and preferably most of the people working every single day. So they lop off Saturday and Sunday, then they divide the whole population, working population, into fifths. So and they assign each group a day. So there's 1/5 is assigned to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And they're also assigned colors. They're given pieces of paper on a regular basis so they can remember whether they're yellow or purple or green. And they don't divide the society up according to family or geographic region. Geographic region wouldn't work because they need people working, in the different factories. And they don't respect the boundaries of the family. So, if there's 2 working parents, one will work in one day, one will work on another day. And so nobody has a day off at the same time. And this doesn't go over very well. Pretty soon there start to be, slowdowns. Machines start mysteriously breaking. There's an element of resistance to this, and there's also an element of, your people are ending up having to move around from place to place because, they're covering people on their days off. So what is it? Eventually, the Communist Party realizes that this is not a good idea, that this is not working, and 3 years later, takes 3 years, they get rid of what's called the continuous work week, and they take another 5 years before they restore Saturday and Sunday to the Soviet calendar. So, if you think about this, this is the sort of thing that gives social engineering a bad name. But I decided to write a book about the Sabbath because I realized we were doing something like that to ourselves. Obviously, I didn't know about the continuous work week at the time, but I realized that our time was becoming desynchronized. We were no longer working at the same time, and we were no longer playing at the same time, and we were no longer resting at the same time. And I had a hunch that this was not only unpleasant as a family when you can't coordinate your schedule, but it was bad for us as a society. A calendar is really important, not just because it keeps you on schedule, but because it marks off what periods of time, what days are important to our society, what holidays are important to our society, what days of rest are important to our society. It's not just a calendar, it's a blueprint for a shared life. So, what is it about the Sabbath that attracted me? It's an idea of rest which is a little bit different from the kind that Dana was talking about, because it's not a solo activity. It's not something you do in a darkened room. It's something you should do with other people. Traditionally, the Sabbath is at a synagogue or in a church. The majority of people, I think, in America, I'm not really sure about this figure, but I think a lot of people are secular and don't necessarily go to church. I think the younger generation doesn't go to church as much as people used to. But they did used to take Sunday off, for example, or take Saturday and Sunday off and do things together. And I don't mean to say that they're not doing that anymore, but I do mean to say that it's about a third less than it used to be. And I just want to say that this is something that also affects lower income people, minorities, more than it does other people, because they are the ones who have to work the sort of unsynchronized jobs, the jobs where you get your schedule the week before, the jobs where, like at an Amazon warehouse, where you're required to sign something saying that you will be willing to work weekends, overtime, and be willing to do it on a moment's notice. One reason this happens to us is because this country has fewer work protections. It has to do, there's a correlation between rest time and the strength of unions. Most societies have rules, most industrialized nations have rules governing the length of a work week. You cannot go beyond 48 hours or 60 hours, even with overtime. We do not have that. We do not have any rules giving people the right to demand a synchronized schedule, a 9-to-5 type schedule, or something at least regular, that is not something we have. So in my book, I sort of make the case that the Sabbath gives us an image of rest, not just as stopping work, not just as a sort of non-productivity in the monetary sense, but of collective non-productivity. It is important to rest together, and we are losing sight of that ability as our temporal structures sort of decalibrate. So that's the main message of my book. Thank you.
Hello, thank you all for being here today. As I was preparing, first of all, it might be funny, I kept waking up and being like, oh my God, what am I gonna say about rest? And then just going back to sleep. But I actually feel happy a lot of the time to be in a space where rest has become work. Work is rest. And the lines blur because we falsely compartmentalize these things. And that doesn't actually serve our rest. Because then when we're working those long weeks you were just talking about, we start to tell ourselves, I'm not getting any rest, I'm not getting any rest. But rest is critical for us to function in every moment. So I guess while I continue to gather my thoughts, maybe just check in. What's a way that you're resting right now? That may be mentally, emotionally. What's on your to-do list tomorrow that you're already like, I'm not worrying about it till then? That's a good one to be with when I'm stressed out. I go, what are all the things I need to do later that I'm not doing right now? And also in the body, something that comes from my yoga and acrobatic practice is knowing that all the parts of my body can't be working at 100% ever. There's a balance. And in order for one part of my body to be holding a lot of tension and doing a lot of work, another part of my body actually has to let go and rest to support that balance. So maybe also tune into your body and realize, okay, what's doing some holding right now? And is there a part of your body that's actually really relaxed? You almost don't notice it. Or you go, oh yeah, my arm is just on the armrest. This kind of philosophy and practice is really important in a community of multiply marginalized people, where we're not only often overworked and doing underpaid jobs without these fixed schedules, we're also doing a lot of internal work, mental work to hold space for a lot of suffering, whether that's our own or it's other people's. And that is something that is really difficult to get rest from. It might be like, okay, I'm trying to zone out, I'm trying to physically relax, but mentally, right, the wheels are turning. And for me especially, that's the rest that's the hardest. But I also live with chronic pain, which is my reminder when I sit back down, I will put sunglasses on so my neurological system can get some rest. I live with chronic migraines, and that light especially is just like a lot. But yeah, at the same time as I'm here and, dealing with the light, I also know I get to rest in this moment. And I want to, in my own practices, always be in touch with the ways I get to rest. So when it comes to rest for resistance, there's two key things I really want to talk about. One is the way that we serve and support others. it's really difficult to acknowledge, yes, we individually need more rest. That's true for almost all of us. This is a very overworked society. And in what ways does my rest stop other people from being able to rest as much as they need? And this balance is a key part of rest for resistance. It's not just social justice means I need more rest, so I'll take all the rest I need and not worry about the impact. But truly, how can I rest in ways that are part of the liberation of all people? And in what ways am I willing to maybe sacrifice some of my rest, maybe get a little less sleep when I have the capacity to support others? And I want to rest in my own life enough to be available to other people in those moments so that I can know, you know what, I got a lot of sleep last week. And this week, maybe my friend is in distress and has nobody else to call. And I'm tired, but if I really check in, yeah, I can be there for my friend. It may be a personal relationship. It may also be something that's happening in society, right? The reality of activism is there's a lot of people who lose sleep in order to increase awareness and action around social injustices. And just because we all need more rest, that doesn't mean that they should stop. It comes back to that question of balance. How do we take turns showing up for each other and not leave somebody there when they haven't had a day off in weeks? And make sure that everybody is nourished with all the different kinds of rest. So one of the best things about Rest for Resistance, I think, is seeing how many kinds of rest there are, and that we all need different ones at different times. And that can be very complex, but it's also great because maybe somebody is tired actually of being at home, zoning out in front of Netflix, and they're ready to go to the protest, right? Whereas somebody else is like, I've been able to actually rest in some ways from that mental distress, knowing that there's a whole community holding this awareness, doing something about the suffering of other people. And now it's time to go home and just chill on the couch, right? Get some sleep. So it's a little bit about serving others and how interrogating the way that our rest impacts other people and how much rest we're getting can help us make sure we're showing up for others. But it's not easy to do that unless we're doing the internal work of rest. And there's also a balance there. So to circle back to where we started, how are you resting right now? And what is the work that you're doing right now? I find a lot of support through meditation practices. And a very simple meditation practice is increasing awareness. So having our focus just go to whatever our focus is on, right? Which is often negative. And just being okay with that and going, oh, okay, my back hurts. And I need to get that message from my body. That is a good thing if our body is functioning to tell us what it needs. But there's also more happening than that. Or, you know, I'm so stressed out because, I mean, it's finals week, right? Anybody else in academia, this is just a stressful time. We all know it, we all ride through it together. And maybe my attention is on that first. But then expanding awareness through meditation or some contemplative practice and just going, what else is going on, right? What else happened today? Did I get to at least enjoy a nice cup of tea, right? If you have a pet, maybe you get those nice moments with your pet. And if there's nothing in your awareness right now, and it feels like I have PTSD, so sometimes it's just like everything is crisis all the time. And I have to let myself be there, but I also need the skill to get out of it. And this is one of the easiest ways for me to get out of it, is to realize, okay, what's happened in the past that wasn't a moment of crisis? Maybe it was just a nice walk in the park or a day at the beach. Having a difficult life doesn't mean everything is difficult all the time. And part of rest isn't just letting go and just being on autopilot, which is important when we're out of capacity to direct our focus and energy. But sometimes when we have the capacity, focusing on something that's positive and holding that alongside the negative and the distress, and recognizing that comfort and discomfort can exist and do exist at the same time. So I hope during our talk today, as we discuss some things about inability to rest and people not having access to rest, be with the discomfort as it arises. Know it's okay to have a limited capacity and not have to go to, from 0 to 10 to hold space for other people's struggle and for social injustice and inequality. And have the capacity you have to hold enough space for that to not be completely turning away. And then also know it's okay to have our comfort alongside that. That's part of the rest we need to keep going, and for people experiencing burnout to recover from burnout and stay committed to social change for the long haul.
Thank you so much to our speakers for being here. I'm so excited for this discussion. It's been wonderful to hear from you. Thank you, everybody here in person and online. I'll just say a couple words about myself first. I will also say off the bat that I'm not here as a neutral third party. I am definitely in favor of sleep and rest. So you won't hear me questioning whether it's a good thing or not. And I think I started thinking about it more concretely probably about 13 years ago or so. I think it was in 2010. I was working in an office and I had to go into the office every day. And it was a Monday, I think it was like a beautiful Monday, maybe in late March or early April. And we had a whole office meeting. So everybody was in this one room and it had windows all around. So we could see it was really nice outside. And, it was just normal office stuff happening. They were talking. And all of a sudden this feeling came over me and I was just like, what's happening? Like, we are not supposed to be here. This is not how we're supposed to be spending our time, right? And I was kind of like, all right, maybe I need a vacation. So I did take a vacation and that helped. But kind of ever since then, I've been thinking a lot about how we spend our time, how we have to spend our time sometimes and how we choose to spend our time other times. So that's kind of the first time that I started thinking about rest as this concrete thing that I'm like, yes, I support this for myself and for others. So I want us to be able to have an organic conversation here where you all can ask each other questions as well. I don't want it to just be, I question, you answer. That said, I do definitely have questions. So I wanted to start off by asking a question to all of you. Katie mentioned hustle culture in her initial remarks. And there's a lot of content on the internet praising and kind of really leaning into this hustle culture. People proudly talk about like how many side hustles they have and how they don't have a minute where they're not doing something productive, by which they often mean financially productive. And there are videos that talk about like, it's amazing, this 87-year-old man works all day. Wow. And I will definitely say, of course, as you all have noted, our society is set up that some people have to do that. But why do you all think it is that people hold up this constant hustle and grind as such a great way to live? And how can we counter that message?
Okay. So hustle culture is very dangerous. And I'll first say that we know that social media is full of perceptions that aren't reality. And while hustle culture may be praised and uplifted, I am pretty sure that individuals that are truly engaged in that are not feeling their best. So in those opening remarks that I gave, I talked about how sleep is so important for our performance. And so while someone may feel, not the person that is forced into that circumstance, but for those that elect to do that, meaning engage in hustle culture, they would perform much better if they didn't. And we have actual data that suggests that the more someone sleeps, the better their outcomes are. And so that's not just health. So in actual academics, we have data that shows that especially for those that are school age, that those who take a test at 8 a.m., they will perform better at 10 a.m. than at 8 a.m. with no additional opportunity to learn. So just that idea of being more awake, going through that process of having an adequate amount of sleep. So we have data that suggests that it's better. Now, when we think about hustle culture in terms of health inequities within marginalized populations, specifically African-American populations, there's a strong historical root to that. And then it comes from enslaved times where it was intentionally emphasized to work all the time, and you were punished if you didn't, and sleep deprivation was one of those punishments. And so that toxic ideal has been passed down through generations, not at the fault of these individuals, but at the fault of those who perpetuated that toxic environment. And so we see, and we've done focus groups, so this is supported by data, that, it's this generational pass down that you must work hard to do well. But again, we have data that suggests that that's just not accurate. So.
When I was researching my book, one of the things I discovered that fascinated me is that the 19th century labor union movement fought harder for the reduction of hours in the work week than they did for a raise in pay, because they were working these brutal 60, 80-hour weeks, and they were fighting for, I think, a 60-hour week, actually, at first, to get it down from 80. This is something that very few people have done in the labor movement in recent times. Only there was a railroad strike recently in which the fight was for days off. Do you remember that strike? It was the one that was resolved by the White House, and they were forced to take an agreement whereby they would be paid more per hour, but they complained that they didn't have any days to go to the doctor or be with their family, and if they did have days, they were not regular. They were now and again. So this is the first labor fight I had come across that actually dealt with time, with length of the work week. I think it's exactly what Dana says. We have internalized this idea of working really hard because, of course, it leads to success and money, which we also valorize, and sort of a sense of status. So the more we feel that we're sort of hustling and getting ahead, the more we feel that we, are achieving, fulfilling ourselves, which is ridiculous, or achieving the American dream. I also think that as the American dream, or the idea, the sort of things that we thought we were promised for hard work slip away from us as they are doing, we feel the need to hustle more. And again, that gets internalized and valorized and celebrated on social media, among other places. And I think it's a little sad.
This question brings up a lot. I'm a longtime freelancer. And sometimes I hear from freelancers that they get like days off. Just like, what is that? Because overall, it's a culture of you hustle and you get things done. And, if your career expands and now it feels like you got 4 careers, like, way to go, you're really doing it. But it's so hard to get out of the mentality. I think I have at home somewhere a pin that actually says like self-care hustle. So even in the rest work, we're just taking this mindset from here and like shifting it over here, which is part of why I think that duality of rest and work, it's more complicated than that. But especially, this brings up for me in disability justice that there's so much pressure on people who are disabled, who are working to just hustle and do more. I've also felt this in school, that if I have to work twice as hard to do the work while I'm sick and in pain, well, I need to just do it. And if I get a lower grade, then that's just the way things work. And I should still just be grateful to be part of the system. But disabled people have never been a real integral part of the system of work, and don't fit into these ways of just push yourself, just do more, just overcome, and hustle a little harder to make ends meet, to be successful. Like, now I lost my train of thought. But I think that it's so difficult to try to figure out then how do we apply disability justice in the workplace, because it's just kind of tacked on to this hustle culture. And even if we're acknowledging through statistics and through personal stories how it doesn't apply, there's still just, well, we'll just adapt to try to include other people. But I also want to share, when it comes to hustle culture, for me as someone with bipolar disorder, it's extremely toxic. And there's this idea of it's a good thing to be able to work long days, to produce more than other people sometimes. Again, that, I should be grateful that I can excel in this high energy way. But especially when the culture is asking people to sacrifice sleep, and sleep is integral to mental health. Absolutely. Sleep is medicine for a lot of mental health issues. We're just focusing on productivity at the expense of people's health and well-being. And if individuals are suffering, that also means the whole society is suffering, right?
So you talked a little bit, Dom, about that there's not a binary between work and rest, and that there are lots of different ways to rest. And again, kind of for all of you, how can people start to shift their relationship to work and rest? Like, what direction should we be going in?
Well, I think Dom and I are like on the opposite sides of this one, actually. I think there need to be clear distinctions between work and rest, because otherwise, I'm a freelancer now too. I work at home, and that's just, everything is just work by another name. If I'm doing the work of self-care, it feels like work. If everything is in the same space, so it feels like work. And I think I crave those boundaries. I'm very glad when Friday night comes and I have to stop. And I can't really do much besides well, there's all these crazy rules that govern the Jewish Sabbath. But anyway, I love these distinctions. In fact, in the Jewish Sabbath, there's a wonderful tradition where at the end of Saturday night, when the sun sets, you bring out a candle and you bring out some wine and some spices, and you have a little ceremony where you light the candle and you drink the wine and you smell the spices, and you thank God for making a division between day and night, between holy and secular, meaning the holy day of the Sabbath versus the rest of the week. So it's a celebration of the division.
So this is a tough one, because
it involves not only our individual choice, but how our society is really set up to whether or not it promotes or hinders our ability to have a balance. And so I think it's easy for us to say to set boundaries, and maybe like my co-panelists, I have a hard time with that as well. And it becomes this strong decision to stop at a certain time because there's always more work to do, right? And so I don't have a clear answer of what that looks like. And so in my work, I think a lot about how we are nested within broader environments. You know, we're individuals within families, within households, within neighborhoods, within society. And so within that, I really rely on our society promoting these boundaries for us that allow us to implement those. And so if that's, policies around work hours. And so some fields are better than others. So for example, in the medical field, there are a set number of hours that residents can exceed. For professional drivers, there is a set number of hours that you cannot exceed. There are mandatory screenings for sleep apnea for truck drivers. And so I think we need to expand that into these other industries. And I was really actually disappointed to hear about this Amazon rule about mandatory weekends and evenings. So I think it really all really relies on policy and laws that make it mandatory for us to have these more healthy boundaries, because otherwise we're subject to societal influences of continuing to work and doing these other things. And sometimes we need laws like wearing a seatbelt. It's, for the best, right? And so I would really say the answer really falls in us having the proper policies and living in a society that's not so 24 hours, but also that can lend to our own circadian rhythms. Because everyone is not a day person and go to sleep at night, right? So we have night owls and so on. So we need to be able to live within those, our circadian rhythm, and also have the boundaries set at a societal stance. And I get a little nervous saying that because we don't want too much regulation, but we do want, the healthy promotion of that work-life balance.
I wanted to add something to your brilliant remarks, which is that we don't just live nested. We live at the intersection of competing schedules, right? Mm-hmm. So there's your academic life, right? Yes. There's your publishing schedule. There's your work schedule. There's your child schedule, which is radically different from anything else, right? Because children do not live by the clock, especially when they're really little. There's all kinds of different competing demands. And one of the things, that one of the reasons I privilege the Sabbath is it is this idea of a hard stop. It's a hard stop. It does not matter, and that's why it has to, it needs the force of religion. It almost doesn't work without law or religion. Right? Mm-hmm. I say it's like a fair labor standard to act only religious, right? It sets a limit of 40 hours. That's why I think we really need policy, because we have these competing schedules tearing at us.
I'm so curious about what's happening in policy now. And I agree that we need society and communities to help set boundaries, and also need within that some ability for individuals to self-determine what is truly restful for them, right? Because some people may look like they're doing too much, and if you ask them, they're like, this is actually the most restful thing I could be doing right now. And I worry about policy because we live in a country where some people benefit from the policies and the labor laws, and some people don't. There's even legal work that people end up working below minimum wage. One of those is Uber for some reason, these big corporations are able to get things right on the books where they're like, no, we're following the laws and the policies. But when you ask real people on the ground, they're like, no, I'm going out and working a long day and it's miserable, maybe outside in horrible weather. And at the end of the day, not actually making minimum wage. Also as a freelancer, I know there's a lot of freelancers who aren't really making minimum wage. And when people put too much pressure on people to self-advocate for their conditions to change, it doesn't actually mean that change is possible. So it's very difficult. But I think it's interesting to talk about religion in this because I'm so grateful to be a Buddhist practitioner. I know that Buddhism is not some perfectly nonviolent, restful religion. I'm also somebody who's Tamil Christian, so I need to learn more personally about what's happening in Sri Lanka with the Buddhist government there and the oppression against Christian people. But for me, Buddhism is where I've learned a lot of how to rest in the work. And that can be dangerous because I don't want to tell people, work 80 hours a week, just learn how to rest in the work. That's not a solution. But also it can be very powerful to realize when I'm cooking, for example, if I'm cooking as a meditation practice, that can be a very restful experience. If I'm cooking and instead my mindset is, oh my God, I have to cook. This is horrible. I don't want to chop these vegetables. I don't want to have to do. Now it's terrible. Now it's not restful. So this is the same activity, but my internal relationship to the activity actually determines how much of an energy drain it is versus is this something that maybe I'll feel nourished and not just by the food that I'm cooking, but by the process. So I care very deeply in my life about I don't dream of a life with no work. That actually sounds very sad to me. I know other people disagree, that's fine. But I want to be able to learn how to be part of processes that are productive, that are creative, that are generative, in a way where I don't feel exhausted at the end of the day. Where I don't feel unhappy, like I had to do this thing. I can feel grateful that I got to be part of a process, that I got to be, applying my individual strengths and perspective and working with other people in a generative way. That's actually my dream. And then what does that mean to have that kind of relationship with others and with work and have days off and have something like a Sabbath where it's truly, put down, not just the activity, but worrying about something, that mental carrying the stress with me. And I think that does take community support. I think it's very hard to do that as an individual.
Just want to add on one thing that Dom said about the policy, and I want to just give a quick example. So you were absolutely right in talking about these minimum wages. So we think about the broader context, the policy would actually be raising minimum wage. So minimum wage is not a livable wage, which causes people to work multiple jobs who don't have time for rest and sleep. But if we raise the minimum wage, we can eliminate that need to work multiple jobs. So in some of these policies, it's just not at the workplace level, but it's at the actual federal level to raise minimum wage. So we all have equal opportunities to be able to have one job that can support our lifestyles, depending on what those are, but to have it an actual livable wage and not just a minimum wage.
Right, and I would just add that if we could unionize the subcontractors, right, who make up the gig economy, and that's starting to happen, they can actually start to limit their time and raise their wage.
So you all have mentioned community and community support. And how basically it's not really possible to have this dedicated time for rest and sleep without community and societal support. And Judith, in your book, I can't remember who it is that you quote, but somebody says, effective change will most importantly come through collective reflection, experimentation, and action. And we've begun to talk about policies a little bit, like what are the structural barriers that exist that are impeding our access to rest? Like, is it just policy? What else is there?
Capital. Let's just talk about capital. No, I mean, first of all, globalization, actually. So a lot of people are functioning on the time schedules of other countries in their work life. And they might be in a family where other people aren't. And they can't necessarily be together. So there are a lot of competing schedules. But a lot of it has to do with sort of globalization, factories that do just-in-time orders, asynchronous learning, synchronized learning, all kinds of things that are no longer and are not going to be ever again, unified in this way. It's just not going to happen. But these larger social forces, I think, sort of really do come into the home. They come into the family. They come into the community. It just becomes harder to have the structures of civic society, like philanthropy, volunteer activities, civic activities in your town, because you don't have the time. You're either working too long or you're working odd hours. So, there's this question of how can we use policy to set aside some times that can be used for people to do the same thing together, even if it's only not working together and resting, recreation, taking long walks or sports, whatever it is that will protect this time, because I think it's only going to fragment further.
Yeah, so I'll just add, I totally agree with what Judith said, and I would additionally think about, from a lifespan perspective, what's a very strong determinant is school start times for young folks. And so there's now an initiative from Healthy People 2030 is to delay school start times to no earlier than 8:30 a.m. And so this is for individuals that go to primary and secondary schools. So essentially, having people wake up really early, and if we think about those that live in inner cities that are bused across, some of them are getting up, or even rural areas, getting up at 4:35 a.m. to go to school. So then they go to school. And then some of them have extracurriculars after school. And then there's homework. And then there's family time. And then you go to sleep, and our young people who need at least, 9 to 10 hours of sleep are getting 5. And so that's an important barrier is school start times. And again, there's lots of bills that have been proposed and passed in areas, but having the widespread adoption of delaying school start times is very important for young folks. And then additionally, for adults and really young folks as well, is the use of electronics. And there's been a number of documentaries that have come out and that talk about the addictive nature of social media and how different social networks are utilized to push notifications at a certain time to keep people engaged. And so it's, what we try and promote in some of the sleep promotion work that we do is not to use electronics within 2 hours of bedtime, but for others that might be challenging. And I'm sure, some of us have looked at one picture that turned into 1,000 pictures, scrolling. But this widespread is really dangerous and really threatens our ability to sleep. And then in addition to that use, it's a type of things that we're looking at night that can be very triggering, very stress promoting. So engaging in that social media use and seeing very violent sometimes acts that occur can cause stress and anxiety, which can also delay sleep.
Yeah, actually, that serves as a perfect transition to our audience Q&A portion, because actually somebody was asking a question. Actually, several people thumbs up the question about school schedules and being misaligned with what science says. So you were very prescient. One of the questions that we have here is, how does the death of the third place, somewhere outside the home and work that people can hang out, impact the ability of people to have social rest?
Well, that's actually something I've been more and more struck by, which is the decline of these sort of civic spaces where people can gather, and how they've been replaced in a lot of parts of America by religious spaces, by mega church complexes, by Jewish community centers. I think actually one reason for the appeal of religion, the sort of returning appeal of religion in American life, is that it does provide this third space. And so many communities that are losing their sort of downtowns, or have lost their downtowns, and have lost this notion of a public space. You know, we find them here and there. There was the Starbucks moment, or the coffee shop. There's the pickup basketball game. But I think it's hard to find it, and I think it does have to be organized to some degree. And I think those are the institutions that are fraying, and they're being replaced by churches when they're being replaced, and when they're not replaced, it's just a terrible decline of civic life.
I miss third spaces. And I don't think that the electronics are going to replace that. It's been difficult as a community organizer to shift from meeting in person to now everything's on Zoom. And it took me a while to really figure out and commit to, and realize that meditating together online isn't the same thing as in person. So I can't replicate that experience for people on Zoom. What I've found, which thankfully some friends who teach told me to encourage me to do this virtual work, there's other benefits online, which is wonderful. So it doesn't mean these virtual spaces are going to replace the in-person, having a community center, having a real in-person classroom, right? It can be really great. One of the things that I really love is being able to have a camera off and still be in the community, right? That's really great. And for the community I organize for of queer and trans BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color, that's really powerful for us. Not having to be seen, not having to do a performance, and still having the option to engage that way. But a lot of times it's almost everybody has the camera off, and that's really great. I also personally find having the support to meditate in my home makes a difference. But I'm so easily distracted if I'm on Zoom trying to meditate with other people. And that doesn't happen when I'm in person. So trying to squeeze everything into the one space, it has its limits. I live in a studio apartment. I work in the studio apartment. I go to school most of the time in the studio apartment. My partner and I share our life in the studio apartment. We're about to welcome a child in a few months. And I know that, traditionally a lot of families have lived in such small spaces. The difference is trying to socialize in that space, work in that space, and that people have so much access to me also through the computer, the camera. Sometimes I just have to take it off the monitor and put it away, so it doesn't feel like it's always threatening us with other people witnessing us in our one space. So I hope that the third spaces will come back, because there's no way to rest in that same way when we're doing everything in one space all the time. It's just so much harder to rest when it's all happening at once, right?
Yes. So one of our questions here asks, how do those of us with power and influence in workplaces help foster practices and spaces that allow rest for all? Just real quick.
Don't create a culture in which it's expected that you will get work overtime or, take work home. Don't text your employees on the weekend. Try. I mean, if it's urgent, obviously, but create a culture. Tell them, create a culture in which it's not acceptable to communicate with each other about work over the weekend, for example.
And after a certain time on weekdays.
Yeah.
Yes.
I wish I had answers for this. I really do. I'm grateful, though. I think a lot of people are exploring the question and are willing to wade into messy work conflict just to figure out what else we can do. Something that's bothered me for years, which I am very reluctant to talk about, is the word deadline. I'm just like, that's such a harsh word. And we just use it like it just doesn't mean anything serious. And what I've been trying to reconceptualize is not avoid the word, right? But what does it really mean? So for me, I will only use the word deadline, and usually don't if I'm working on a team, but to express the opportunity will die. Right? Coming from publishing as an editor, there is a point where it's like, your thing isn't going to go in the next edition. Your thing is not going to be able to be published. And if you miss the deadline, it doesn't mean it can't shift somewhere else, but that specific opportunity has died. But otherwise, there's a lot of fear and especially I think for disabled people, using the word dead like it's work is life or death is not the most compassionate.
Yes. Could you speak to how our society directs even our downtime activities, consumption of entertainment, vacations, and even self-care wellness practices to support capitalism?
Well, I think that the questioner just described the problem right there. It's the commercialization of leisure, right? And we live that all the time. That's another thing sort of fragmenting us. But yeah, I mean, it's comical. It's deeply unpleasant. I don't have answers, but certainly, everything, social media brings commercialization into every single aspect of our lives. And these are forces that I think are very hard to fight, and one has to really sort of try to raise awareness in your life, as you say, become more aware of your surroundings and try to fight them personally. I don't see a movement happening against this. Do you?
I don't, but I think what's similar to hustle culture is also this culture of work hard, play hard. That's being emphasized. And what's important to consider is that if you constantly need a vacation, even after you've come back from vacation, the problem is in the daily life. It's not the need for vacation. And so that's the cue to try and make an adjustment.
I believe it's a real practice to look at the way that money is prioritized in our relationships, including relationships to hobbies, to downtime, and just trying to figure out what part of my life can be valued in lots of ways before money enters the relationship, because the hustle culture, the monetization of hobbies into, a whole side gig. I've done it, and one of the best ways I've managed to do it is through meditating and making mala bracelets. And yes, I would sell them and exchange them for money sometimes, but it wasn't ever really about that. And if I felt like, oh, my impulse to create this and to be in my meditation is to make money, it was like, no, this is not the time. There may be money in the exchange sometimes, but it can't really be about that, because then it shifts. Like I said, I care a lot about process. So it shifts my process. It shifts my thinking and my feelings. And ultimately, it'll shift the final product also.
So we have a few minutes left. So I'm going to combine a question that I have with a question from the audience, and then also ask a very short question at the end. So I think we have about 5 minutes left. So how do we resist the expectations from our workplaces and culture to be constantly on and checking our email, text messages, and social media? And what are things that we can do as individuals to kind of promote our own rest and sleep?
Yeah, so a quick answer to the first part is, connecting with individuals who have the privilege and the power to make the change. And so that may not, be the staff person, and it may be finding an advocate that's in the C-suite or an executive that can make that change. And so you asked a question earlier, and someone said, how can they use their power or privilege? So it's about creating allies and having those speak on our behalf, because there are consequences sometimes for, trying to advocate for certain things. So making sure you partner with the right person that can advocate on your behalf is important. Can you reread the second part of the question?
Oh, yeah, it was just about what we can do as individuals to promote our own sleep and rest.
Yeah, so for the sleep piece, it's a lot of what I talked about in the last slide. It's really about creating a routine that works for you, that's conducive to promoting healthy sleep. So having your sleep environment, again, be promoting to that. So as best you can, remove electronics, television, create a bedtime routine. For some people, that's reading. For some people, it's taking a bath. So whatever it is that feels good to you, that puts you in a relaxation state to initialize sleep, is really what should be done on a consistent basis.
I would say it's, my husband has this phrase, it's sort of a joke, it's all about the relationships. But it really is all about the relationships. So I think a lot of people, because we prioritize work so much, rest becomes this idea of an empty space. It's not work. It's kind of empty. And, one of the reasons that collectivized non-productivity is so powerful is because you substitute work with something, that can be as satisfying, more satisfying. Often it's less satisfying because we don't know how to do it, because we think of this as empty space. But the more you can fill up your non-work time with these meaningful relationships, the more it's going to become real and meaningful to you, and at least compete with the work, if not take priority over the work. But it really is, as my husband says, all about the relationships.
I feel like I'm not the person to ask. I have 7 or 8 email addresses. It's just out of control, and I just look at them all too much. And so now I'm just in a process of observing myself in the cycle. And I think that it's really important for me, like what you said, it's about the relationship. And it's not all my fault that I'm doing this. And it's also not all somebody else's fault that I'm doing this either. So it's really important for me to figure out within Rest for Resistance, how can I reclaim my energy? So if that's even looking at the email inboxes 10 times less in a day, I have reclaimed a little bit of that energy back. I've reclaimed a little bit of my mental space back. And sometimes by doing that, I am able to be more in touch with not just the autopilot of my mind, which is, maybe going a little too hard into the email inboxes and what do I need to do? and be more in touch with my body. And especially for me, when I'm struggling to sleep, sometimes if I shift my awareness from what my mind wants to do, like just watch more videos on Facebook or something, and pay attention to my body, then I realize my body is tired. And maybe my mind and my body aren't on the same page, but if it's, past 11 o'clock and my body feels exhausted, I need to switch my focus to that and start to unwind, because I know myself, I could stay in the mental cycle of just looking at stuff online until 2 a.m. And that's not serving me in the long run, or probably other people.
It is serving someone. Yeah, someone's getting rich off that, trust me.
So we're just about out of time. So real quick, I wanted to just ask one last question. When we think about how society and the structures around us kind of value or maybe don't value sleep and rest, what gives you hope?
Post-COVID, there was an awareness of our workaholism, of our fragmentation. There were a lot of people who, when you came home from the office, I think that the move home from the office has not always been good. So a lot of ways in which it's horribly isolating. But I feel like there was also at the same time, after this pause in our lives, a reevaluation of what we were doing. And I get the vibe from your generation that they're just not in the crazy, hamster cage place that I was when I was your age. You seem much wiser about all this. I don't know. And I just feel that there were a lot of articles, there were a lot of people talking about how they want to rethink the place of work in their lives. And it took a reset. It basically took a reset. And are we going to just simply go back to the way we were? Or there's a lot of aspects of life that people are starting to think of. There's a lot of stuff about women in work, mothers in work. But I think there's a lot of little pockets of resistance to the rat race, which I felt like they exploded after COVID.
It's good. I have a lot of answers. I'm I gotta pick one. Sometimes I feel low on hope, and it's a struggle. But hope is, I think, one of our most valuable resources. And I really find hope in not just theorizing about the way that self-care and community care are deeply interconnected, and need to function together in order to happen at all, but really seeing it happen, and seeing people experiment and go through, like I said, the conflict, and not just have this utopian ideal of how it's going to happen, but really be there for the difficult moments as society changes, as we're challenging the rat race and finding other ways to work and live together.
For me, it's my family, it's my friends, it's my community. I know how important sleep is, and I know the negative consequences that come from not sleeping. And so from my work, I am regularly energized and hopeful. And I talked about Healthy People 2030, about the initiative for delaying school start times. There are a number of others, 5 or so, that are all focused on promoting sleep in our society. So as I have seen every 10 years, the list expand, and I see additional bills that are designed to stop daylight savings time, for example, that gives me hope that we are moving in the right direction. And if we continue to do this work and have panels like this and have these conversations with getting the word out, there will be a change.
Well, thank you, all of you, so much for your thoughts and your wisdom and your openness and sharing. I am going to close out now, so just give me 1 second to say 2 things. So you all can keep in touch with Dozer and find out what we're up to. The information should be in your programs, or if online, you'll be able to see that there. And one of the things about discussions like these is just you always wish you had more time to keep talking because it just ends up being so fascinating. So I'm very excited and lucky that we're going to spend a little bit more time together at dinner later tonight. So I just wanted to thank you all again, and please, everybody, let's just show our speakers how much we appreciate their time and expertise.